Okay. Okay, and we are recording. So thanks again, everybody, for joining the Community Services Block Grant Organizational Standards webinar that we are putting on in conjunction with the Colorado Community Action Association and the Department of Local Affairs. I'm Alejandra Diaz. I also go by Alex, and I use they and she pronouns, and I'm the program manager with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for the CSBG program. And CCAA folks, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves as well?
I'll go first. I'm Liz Espinoza, and I am the Deputy Director here at the Colorado Community Action Association. And I'm going to be going through this presentation with Alex today. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Josiah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to have you on here. Excited to think about organizational standards. Looking forward to the November submission. And thank you all for being here. I'll send it over to Jessica. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Roshan, and I am the Associate Director at Colorado Community Action Association. And I appreciate your time today and excited to be here with you all.
Thanks, Jessica. So we will go over the agenda in depth in a little bit, but just as a little bit of an overview, today we're going to be talking about the organizational standards that all entities are required to submit by November 15th, 2023 this year within the THO system. So we'll kind of pop back and forth between the CCAA and myself. This will be recorded, is being recorded as we speak, and we will go ahead and post it up on the CSBG grantee resources page here within the next couple of days so that you have it as a resource along with all of the materials that we cite in the presentation. And we'll also go ahead and send those out in an email. Of course, if you can keep yourself muted unless you have a question, we appreciate it. But anytime you have a question, you're more than welcome to come off mute to ask, raise your hand, or put it in the chat. And we'll either address it as we go or put it in a little parking lot for the end of the presentation. So we will go ahead and jump right in with the CCAA.
Thanks, Alex. Again, I just want to thank everyone for their time today and, of course, their work on the organizational standards. They are a lot of work. So again, thank you for all that you do. Our agenda for the day is going to include, like Alex said, an overview of the standards and why we have them. We're also going to talk a little bit about Colorado's unique structure and how that relates to the standards and how we review them. We'll also go over documentation that you can use to show that you have met the standards and also various resources that you can utilize around the standards. We'll also be going over some standards that are often not met. And then not only are we going to do why they're not met, but we're also going to give you some information on the best way to actually meet those standards. And at the very end, we'll have some time for questions, comments, next steps. So if you have anything you want to jump in at the end, we will be available. And I will turn it back over to Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. So as a little bit of an overview of the CSBG organizational standards, they came about because OCS issued Informational Memorandum 138, which is linked in the presentation, and it effectively is what caused us to need to do the organizational standards. And it describes the state and federal roles and responsibilities for the org standards as a part of a larger performance management and accountability system for CSBG. If you've ever taken Roma training, we go into depth into how all these things came to be and sort of how they all fit together. So that was in 2015, and the CSBG Act establishes for federal and states that we report basically. And then org standards took that, formalized it, and made it so that starting in 2016, every state had to complete organizational standards for all of their entities as a part of an enhancement of those original accountability and performance management metrics that were written to the CSBG Act originally that have evolved over time. And of course, in the CSBG program implementation manual, we try to reference how we approach the org standards on pages 14 and 15. So especially if you're new or perhaps haven't done org standards before, we encourage you to take a look at the program implementation manual, see the verbiage that we have in there, as well as all the resources that we put up on the website, because we try to really thoroughly explain this really complex process that happens every year, because it is a major part of how we do measure our results, how we ensure accountability among the state as well as our eligible entities. So we appreciate everyone prioritizing it the way that you do. Moving on to the next slide, we have a little bit of a timeline in the process. So as I mentioned briefly, this year org standards are due November 15th, 2023 in the THO Software Solutions Reporting System. And that is already open. People can already make changes. So you're welcome to start making changes for this report, which is due in November. And that deadline has shifted a little bit over even this year, certainly from year to year. So thank you to everybody for your understanding as we try to fine tune and really optimize the usefulness of this really big report. Because that is why that deadline keeps changing, is we wanted to change it this year to ensure that we captured all of the new community needs assessment, community action plan, strategic plan work that everybody is doing as part of this application cycle. So moving the organizational standards to after that application submission is really helping us to capture the most up-to-date relevant information that we know everybody is really working very hard on, and we want to make sure that we give everybody appropriate credit for that. So once everything is submitted, and all entities hopefully have submitted by November 15th, then we at the state office and the CCAA will complete our initial review and will provide feedback via email. And then eligible entities will have 1 month to resubmit. So that means addressing any unmet standards, any standards that are not marked as met specifically, whatever that looks like. And some will require written technical assistance plans, and that will be indicated by the statuses that we'll cover here in a moment. After entities resubmit within a month, addressing any items that need TAPs, then we will complete our final review at the state office and CCAA side. And then we will go ahead and complete the assessments, which is basically percentages of standards met that each eligible entity and the aggregate has sort of done. And then we use that as a part of our annual report submission. We report detailed information on, which entities got 100% compliance, which got 90% compliance, et cetera. And this year we will hopefully have formal feedback that we provide entities with where you fall in that spectrum, whether it's 1% or 100%, 90, 70. That's something that hasn't always been in place in the past, but we're really fine tuning our process for completing that assessment, documenting it in a really finalized fashion, and then also giving that feedback to you so that you at your eligible entities know where you are and where you're headed. And we can work together to get organizational standards compliance up across the board. So as a part of this, of course, there are the submission statuses within THO that THO is relatively new to organizational standards reporting. So we do have some new statuses that we've asked for this year that hopefully are helpful for people, specifically the not applicable status down here at the bottom of this slide. That is a brand new status this year, and it is a status that especially public entities specifically will be able to select for standards that are not applicable. And we'll go over specifically what those are a little further on in the presentation. But again, that's brand new. And so basically when something is selected as not applicable, if it actually is not applicable, then we can remove that from the overall compliance calculation and it will change it a little bit ultimately. So we're hoping that can even fine tune our assessment even further. Some of the other statuses going from the bottom to the top on the slide are not met, TAP not required. That means that we have completed our final review and for whatever reason, we don't require a technical assistance plan. That's not generally used because most of the time, if there's a standard that is not met, then we will want some sort of either plan or documentation about how that will be met in the future. So more often than not, you will see the next status on the list from the bottom up, which is not met, TAP required. And that will indicate to you at the eligible entity that we need some sort of technical assistance plan, basically a plan in writing about how that standard is going to be met. And then there is a not met final review complete, which is just indicating that there has been a plan sort of presented, or some sort of way to meet the standard going forward that is acceptable, and so no further TAP or no formal written response is needed for that standard in particular. And then the most joyful status of all, of course, is met, which means we've accepted the documentation for the standard and nothing further is needed from you on that. So hopefully the submission statuses are clear, and we do within THO and also within our emails provide some pretty specific guidance generally when there is standard that is not met that will either require a TAP or will require further work. So if you ever have questions, of course, you can reach out, but hopefully it's very clear when there is additional work needed on a standard, and you can certainly ask us if not. So I will move on over to the CCAA to continue.
Thanks, Alex. So now that we know kind of what the timeline is, what the process is, let's kind of look at what the organizational standards kind of pertain. So we have a great PDF tool from the national partners that has all 52 standards from the public entities and the 56 for the private entities lined up in one concise document. So this is a really great resource for us. The standards are broken up over 3 major areas, and those you will see on this slide. And we'll start with maximum feasible participation, which really looks at customer involvement, community engagement, and the community assessment. Each of these have very specific pieces of documentation that we will be looking for to show compliance. Next, we have vision and direction. Here we look at organizational leadership, board governance of the tripartite board or your tripartite advisory council or committee, and strategic planning. Strategic planning is what you kind of think of as your traditional strategic plan. But since we are a little bit different here in Colorado, of course, it can be a bit difficult on how we run things through public entities and major county departments. So those strategic plans may not provide what you need specifically in addressing poverty for the standard. So we may have to look at alternative plans to put in place to meet that particular standard of strategic planning. Lastly, we will look at operations and accountability. Human resources, we'll look at your policies and procedures that we need to see in a nonprofit and, when applicable, local county governments. Financial operations and oversight. Again, those are going to be internal controls that are needed within the nonprofit and, when applicable, to county governments. Our last category here you see is data analysis. Data end analysis. This is really focusing on, do we have systems in place to track our clients? What are their demographics? What are the services that we are giving to them? And of course, for those of you who've taken Roma, what are their outcomes that they have obtained? And then also, do we take the opportunity with our tripartite board or advisory council to analyze that data and to receive recommendations and advisory information from the tripartite board or committee to submit that data regularly. Remember, completing compliance in all these standards is not expected. We don't expect everyone to be at 100% all of the time, but we do expect that there is continuous improvement to maintain compliance with these standards, and that they are being eventually met. And if they're not, that we have something in place on why they're not. And again, some standards might not be met, but that require immediate implementation or immediate compliance, such as if we find improper structure within the board, that's going to be something that we really hit and focus on immediately. The others we may work on down the line, and those will be noted in the system. I think that's all I have on this slide. So I think it goes back to Alex.
Thanks, Liz. Now we'll talk a little bit about Colorado's unique structure and the standards. Colorado is unique in the nation because we have an unusual amount of public entities as opposed to private nonprofits. So that means that a lot of the way we do things are pretty specific to Colorado. And of course, every CSBG office throughout the state has things that they do in their own way, which is kind of one of the fun things about CSBG. And given that we have so many public entities, there's a lot of sort of exceptions to the organizational standards or ways that we do things uniquely that are helpful to call out. And the org standards uses non-universal terms that do need additional clarification depending on the state and, you know, the CSBG program in particular. So some of these terms include department, strategic planning, low-income representative, and democratic selection process, all of which require documentation throughout the organizational standards. So we have, you know, specific ways that we consider those in the state. For example, the department for CSBG may not be an entire department. Maybe it's actually just your program if you're a public entity. So if there's ever a question about how a standard pertains to you at your public entity or, you know, your private nonprofit entity, you can always reach out and ask, but we try to clarify some of those more unique terms throughout THO system and the documentation that we request. Some of the policies for the tripartite board and advisory committee that can also have unique or different applications include the whistleblower policy, conflict of interest sign statements, board orientation and supporting documentation by way of the bylaws, and overall board/committee participation in the Roma cycle. So these can look different depending on the type of organization or even individual organizations throughout the state. For example, a whistleblower policy may not be, you know, present at every public nonprofit that exists. So if it's not applicable, then because it doesn't exist, then you can make that status not applicable for your organization. So of course, the tripartite board and committee meeting agenda and minutes, while the way that those are done from entity to entity might vary, of course, they are often the most relevant documentation to submit for a lot of these standards. Sometimes we offer a couple of different options for what you can submit, but a lot of times it'll be the committee meeting agenda and minutes that really helps us understand that an action was actually taken and documented. And then of course, the organizational/departmental policies and procedures can vary whether you're public or private and even from organization to organization. And those include director compensation, department lead compensation, employee appraisal, risk management, and orientation and training for employees. So these are all some of the trickier organizational standards to really kind of understand how it applies to your organization sometimes. So if you have questions, then do please reach out to let us know. Yeah, so those are unique for us. As far as documentation goes, this is another one of those things that evolves over time as THO fine-tunes their software. So documents larger than 20 megabytes cannot be uploaded into the system. So if you get an error message, one of the first things that you can try is to reduce the size of the document and try again. It just occurred to me, maybe Josiah knows, but the types of documents can matter sometimes too. I know PDF is the most readily sort of the easiest to use within the system, but sometimes the document type can affect whether or not it's approved as well. I see you're off mute, Josiah. Did you have a comment?
Indeed, Alex. The system accepts many different document types, including JPEG files or captures of photos, but you shouldn't have any issues using Word documents or Adobe Acrobat files either. So it should be good across the board in most cases.
Cool. Fantastic. I will say upon review last year, there were some files that just didn't work on our end, which I'm sure caused some frustration for our eligible entities who submitted and sometimes resubmitted and it still didn't work. So I would, when that happens, the first thing to try is to reduce the document size. And we can walk through how to do that. Adobe does have an option that allows you to compress a file. And so a giant, you know, sometimes bylaws or, you know, your employee manual or something can be dozens or hundreds of pages. So either reducing the file size by being really specific about which pages you upload or using a tool like Adobe to compress a file might be a way to make that work. Of course, if you need firsthand training and technical assistance, we're happy to schedule a one-on-one meeting with you if you're having any difficulty. And Connie with THO is often a very helpful resource as well. So as you encounter potential errors or difficulties using the THO system, you know, don't waste too much time on a particular standard, feel free to reach out to myself or someone at the CCAA, and we can either support you directly or send you along to Connie at THO. They often find out about bugs or things that need to be improved from you. So as you are having difficulty, it might not always be you or your computer, it might be the system. So don't hesitate to escalate that to us, and we'll do everything we can to address it quickly. And of course, every standard does require the proper uploaded documentation in the system to certify compliance, and the proper being stressed here. Sometimes there may be documentation that it seems like could fit or might be relevant, but it's not quite what we need. And so we'll try to work together to make sure that something like minutes or something else that really clearly demonstrates compliance with the standard in question can be either provided or worked on in the future, maybe in the form of a TAP. Meeting minutes and agendas, like we mentioned earlier, are oftentimes the best and easiest to obtain for many standards, documentation to obtain for many standards. And this kind of speaks to the fact that organizational standards, while it is kind of a point in time report that is submitted in November, it's something that the organizations that are highly compliant work on throughout the year and are really proactive about, in part with the way that they schedule their tripartite board meetings and the actions that are presented at those tripartite board meetings and how they're documented. So it is a one-time report every year, but it is something that does require forethought throughout the year in order to be able to do really well on. So we provide a lot of documents like calendars and things like that that hopefully help with that we'll go over here later. The Community Needs Assessment and Community Action Plan submitted to DOLA in the grants portal with the application that is due September 29th, 2023 will be used for many standards. The strategic plan from 2023 will also be applicable, and we are once again including the strategic plan in the application that you submit. So all of those things, the CNA, the CAP, and the strategic plan will be touched on in the application that is submitted for CSBG to DOLA in the grants portal. And a lot of those documents can be kind of will be directly applied to the organizational standards for compliance and documentation as well. So these processes all kind of have this interwoven effect. And then of course we have resources from the Community Action Partnership and the DOLA CSBG website, as well as the Colorado Community Action Agency website that entail, I'll just pull them up here really quickly. So this is the CAP website. And you can see that it has everything from the IM that we mentioned to timelines to these really specific assessment tools and org standards tools here. So we highly encourage the calendar of required actions. I think is one that a lot of folks have found very helpful over the years. So I'm just going to pop it open here for folks who maybe haven't seen this tool before. And basically with this, the way we talked about recently, how the tripartite board / advisory committees have to have these actions embedded in their agendas and in their meetings in order to be compliant. So we have, assessment tools here that will tell you whether it's an org standard that has to be maintained, that it's more frequent than annual / as needed every 2, 3, 5 years. And so this is yet another way, especially if you have a very specific standard that you struggle with, put it on your little calendar here, incorporate that into your workflow, and that can be super helpful. So these are more frequent than annually. These are annually, every 2 years. So this is a super handy tool, one of many. So again, if you are the person doing CSBG for your organization, I highly encourage folks to use those calendars and use those resources that we have throughout the presentation to help you do that, because it can be a complex process. So anything that we can do to help, we certainly try to do and to try to make readily available for you. And I will once again change the slide and pass it over to Liz.
Thanks, Alex. So Alex went over briefly that calendar of events, which is specifically for public entities. The National Partnership created that link, but they kind of forgot about all those public entities. So there wasn't a specific calendar for public entities. So we actually created one here at CCAA. And like Alex mentioned, what those do is just kind of break up what those standards are and what that timeline is, so that you can either work on those continuously or, you know, every 2, 3, or 5 years. Also, in addition to that, let's see, what else do we have? Alex went over most of my talking points for this slide, so I gotta skip through it. I apologize. Let's see. Alex, if you let me, I'm going to bring up real quick the additional schedule that we did for public entities. If I can find it. So it's a little bit shorter than what they have over at the partnership, but it still hits on those same ideas, as needed more frequently than annually, and then of course, every 2, every 5, every 3 years. So it looks a little bit different, but for the most part, it's still really fairly similar to what the partnership has put out, specifically for public entities. Okay. Thank you. So we talk a lot about public entities, and on the next slide, you'll see the unique structure and the standards in Colorado, where most of our CSBG eligible entities here are either public within the city and county or local county departments. Sometimes the standards just don't apply to public entities, which is why we have less standards for public versus the private. So if you're going through the THO system, as Alex had mentioned earlier, some just don't apply, and so those are marked as NA, so we don't have to worry about those. On this slide, you can actually see what some of those standards are that do not apply for public entities. Actually, through the next couple of slides, we'll actually see what those standards are. See, whenever a public entity can't show compliance with this standard, we ask that you submit documentation in the system to show that you met the need, but just mark that as not applicable. But I think that's changed now, hasn't it? Everything is not applicable. Alex, through the button, is that right?
I think it's depends on the standard and the entity.
Okay. Completely lost all train of my notes.
Josiah, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that piece. For public entities, these select standards here will not actually show up at all. These are have been deemed nationally as being not applicable. So the system itself for you public entities, I believe, defaults to gray and you can't even report around it. And then the next slide, we'll talk about ones that are not like that, but public entities may still mark as not applicable.
Thank you for that clarification. I have not had an opportunity to fully be in THO and explore, so I don't actually see it. Plus, I think our side may be a little bit different from our view than what the entities actually see when they put in. So I appreciate that clarification for me. Let's see, I think that is all I have specifically on the ones that don't apply that are unmet. I think, Alex, you have the rest of them?
The rest of what is
The
your
ones
question?
that aren't met.
Are you asking me to take the next slide?
I thought, did I miss some slides?
Okay,
I apologize.
yeah, no worries. So we go over here some of the ones that do not apply, 5.3.7.1.8.6. So folks can kind of go through those unless you want to highlight any. And then after that section, I think you start to talk about the standards that are not applicable with the comment, right? So that's kind of what we've been discussing. And then yeah, and then we move on to the frequently not met. Is that where we're at now? Fantastic. Okay. So yes, there are some organizational standards that we've learned over the years do persistently present challenges for a lot of entities. And so we wanted to chat about some of those here just to provide any helpful clarification that maybe will help folks. So starting with standard 1.3, the organizational standard is that the department has a systematic approach for collecting, analyzing, and reporting customer satisfaction data to the tripartite board/advisory committee. And I think the standard, from what I've gathered just from reviewing over the last couple of years, I think the reason that it's often not met is because that approach for collecting customer satisfaction data either is not collected initially, so there is no mechanism in place for getting that feedback from our clients and customers, which, you know, that feedback can be very valuable, which I think is part of why this org standard is in place. But then there's also the aspect of reporting it to the tripartite board/advisory committee. So there's two key components to this org standard. The first is, of course, that you're collecting that data, which is super important. And then the second aspect of it is that it's subsequently being reported to the tripartite board/advisory committee and documented. So whether that's your agenda or your minutes or an email, some kind of substantiation that both of those pieces have taken place. The info was collected and then was subsequently reported to the board or advisory body. So both of those components are required, otherwise it will be unmet. And we recognize that it can be even kind of an administrative lift to get those systems in place. So if you need help setting up a Survey Monkey or a paper survey or a Google form, even, we're real fond of Google at the state, we are certainly always happy to help you, because we know that initial setup can be a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to clear my throat here real quick. The next standard is standard 2.3, which is the department communicates its activities and results to the community. So even though this is often missed, it's actually fairly easy to do. There's a number of ways, whether it's an email blast that gets sent out to the community that reports activities and results in some way, or a website, you know, update for your entity or your county or your organization that talks about the results over the year. Hopefully, you know, collecting that data for the annual report is a helpful mechanism to do that, or a flyer or a newspaper, you know, ad. There's a number of ways to report to the community. I think the easiest that we found is certainly kind of a website update, but anything that shows that you're putting out there information about the awesome work that you're doing is just what we're looking for here. So it can look like a number of things. And then, of course, standards related to the needs assessment are often ones that we see that are unmet, in part because I think, again, our unique structure with a lot of public entities means that a lot of needs assessments sometimes are happening that aren't necessarily CSBG specific. So sometimes it can be hard to meet CSBG specific requirements with a needs assessment that is either, you know, throughout the county or the city or in conjunction with multiple entities. So if you're using something like that that's not specific to the CSBG program as your needs assessment, it's still important to make sure that you're checking all the boxes. For example, the causes and conditions of poverty is one that we see missed a lot in regards to the needs assessment, because we may have something that addresses the causes or conditions of poverty, but maybe doesn't actually tease those out, because once again, we look at those as two distinct things, right? There's the causes of poverty and then there's the conditions of poverty. And if you attend our regional forums, which are coming up, we will go into that specifically and what the differences are between those things. Because I know for me, starting, you know, within the CSBG program, that is something that I've had to tease out for myself, the difference between the causes of poverty and the subsequent conditions of poverty. So identifying each of those distinctly is something that we do look for in the needs assessment, and something that we find is often not there. There's also standard 2.2 that is often missed in regards to the needs assessment, which requires organizations to utilize information from key sectors, including faith-based organizations, private sector, and educational institutions, as well as community-based organizations. And it's all of those. It's not just some of those, right? If you have 3 out of 4 of those entities in your community needs assessment, but not the 4th, it's going to be unmet. So that's one of the standards that we do require all of those entities to be included in the needs assessment in assessing needs and resources. And if it's, you know, 1, 2, or 3 out of 4, it's going to be unmet. It has to be 4 out of 4. And it's similar with standard 3.2 as well, which requires that the organization collects and includes current data specific to poverty and its prevalence to gender, age, and race/ethnicity. So it's gender and age and race/ethnicity, not 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3, all 3. If you don't have all 3 of those components, it will be unmet. So, and then finally, I point to standard 3.4 for private entities, which is the community assessment and public entities. The community assessment includes key findings on the causes and conditions of poverty, which we already talked about. It's just 3.4 specifically. So those are all some that are sometimes tricky. And if you have any questions or we can support, let us know. But please keep your eyes peeled that you're checking all of those boxes and not just some of them. Standard 4.1 talks about the tripartite board/advisory committee has reviewed the department's mission statement within the last 5 years and assured that the mission addresses poverty and the CSBG program and services are in alignment with the mission. Again, this can be, since it's every 5 years, it's a little bit easier to overlook if you don't have your handy dandy calendar. And also if it's not documented, then it's hard for us to substantiate that it actually happened and mark it as met. So putting it in the minutes and having that readily accessible and very clearly documented is huge. And then standard 4.3, which requires that the department's community action plan and strategic plan document the continuous use of the full Roma cycle, and that they've used the services of a Roma certified trainer to assist in implementation. So the most common document that we use as substantiation for this is the paper that entities will get once they submit their community needs assessment and community action plan and strategic plan, those things, to the Roma trainer for certification, i.e. myself/CCAA folks. And then we look it over and provide you feedback, as well as that handy dandy little form that says, yes, I am a Roma trainer and I have certified this. That form is the easiest, most straightforward documentation that this standard was met. And just as a little reminder in regards to that form, I want to really stress that everything in the application, including the key community needs assessment, community action plan, strategic plan, are due at the end of September, which means, sort of working back, that before that, the tripartite board advisory committee have to sign off, the BOCC chair or whoever that chief elected official is has to sign off on that paper that we require be submitted with your application, which means that the plan has to be finalized and probably approved by the tripartite board or advisory committee before that paper gets signed. Before that happens, you have to submit it for Roma trainer review. Right, so it's all due at the end of September, but actually it kind of has to be completed and reviewed and sent to your board and all of these things well before that, just given the nature of, the infrequency of meetings or some of these things. So that is all just to say that, it was a little bit of a shock to me to realize, working backwards, how soon the community needs assessment, community action plan, and strategic plan need to be completed in order to get all of the other boxes checked that are required around that, including this Roma form that is submitted with the org standards. So if you're not well on your way with those processes, please let us know how we can support you, because it is coming up quickly. And with that, I will go ahead and change the slide and hand it back over to my colleague, Liz.
Thanks, Alex. I'll do a little bit better this time, I promise. Starting with standard 4.4, which is another one of those frequently not met. The tripartite board or advisory body receives an annual update on the success of specific strategies included in the community action plan. Again, don't let that term community action plan throw you off. That's just those things that you've planned to do over the next 3-year period. And as we mentioned earlier, the easiest way to do a lot of these is really in those tripartite minutes. So it's being able to submit those and show that you actually provided, some sort of annual report to your board on your activities meets that standard. Then we have standards that are adhering to policy or procedure. Those are a little hard for us to review on our end, because it's how do you monitor that something's being adhered to. So with that, when we're looking at the documentation that you upload, we're really trying to consider the wording of everything that shows compliance with this standard. So if you do have larger documents, again, because it's just a little tricky for us, if you can point out exactly where in those documents that it kind of meets those standards, that helps us a lot. And if there is something that we mark that you haven't met, but you actually feel that it is being met, again, just point us back to that standard and tell us where we can look to find that you're meeting that. And the same with the HR policies and procedures. Standard 5.4, the department documents that each tripartite board or advisory member has received a copy of the governing documents within the past 4 years. For some reason, this one is unmet and is actually really quite easy. And you can meet that by sending out an email to your tripartite board that includes a copy of the bylaws, any of your other governing documents, or any documents you kind of need to get them on an annual basis. And then to meet this standard, really just include a copy of that email showing that it went out to them. And then if you are doing in-person meetings, you can also just kind of print those bylaws out, hand them to your tripartite board members, and make sure that it's on the agenda and in the minutes to meet that particular standard. Standard 5.5, this one's a big one and it covers a lot of ground. The department's tripartite board advisory body meets in accordance with the frequency and quorum requirements and fills board vacancies as set out in its governing documents. So with this, it's going to, it can encompass a lot. We really kind of have to dive into this standard on our end to determine what's required. And so for us, it's going to kind of be looking at your bylaws so that we can see if it is actually spelled out what the frequency of your meetings should be. If you don't have it spelled out in your bylaws, our default is that you meet at least twice a year. And also we have to look at your bylaws to find out what constitutes a quorum. And so those are two of the things that we kind of are going for when we're looking at this particular thing. Let's see. Standard 5.8, tripartite board advisory body members have been provided with training on their duties and responsibilities within the past year. Again, this kind of goes back to 5.4, where we can just send out an email with all those governing documents and then submit that email into the system as proof of your meeting that particular standard, or handing it out during those meetings and including those in the meeting minutes and uploading that documentation for this standard. Is there anything that I missed on that? I'm gonna turn it back over to Alex.
Awesome. Thank you kindly, Liz. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, we start with standard 6.1, that the department has a strategic plan or comparable document that has been reviewed and accepted by the tripartite board and advisory committee in the last 5 years. If not, then the board will develop the plan. So this standard is encompassed in the application that you submit to DOLA in the grants portal this year. Last year, or the last cycle, we did not have the strategic plan included, and subsequently I think we took a ding overall on our organizational standards. So we are including a strategic plan within the application in the grants portal for DOLA, which will be used to cover all of these. And of course, once again, it is important that, especially with your new plan, that it is accepted by the tripartite board / advisory body. So once that is done, it is good for 5 years, which is fantastic. If you do it if we include it and you do it every application cycle, then you're basically covered and just have to submit that documentation. And hopefully that's helpful. Feedback is always welcome, but we noticed when it was not included, it was not great for some entities. Also, some frequently not met standards are standards related to the strategic plan. Again, for the same reason, right? If we don't include it, sometimes it just doesn't exist. And the aspect of presenting it to the board or advisory committee is also an important piece there. And then standards related to financial oversight, specifically standards 8.3 and 8.4. And they stress that the advisory committee is notified of any findings related to CSBG. And I encourage entities to, if there are no findings for CSBG, then maybe just present that in your minutes, and that is really helpful. Otherwise, it can either be not applicable because there were no standards, so there is nothing to do. That one's a little bit squishy in how you approach it. So, I mean, if nothing else, I think it's helpful to inform your tripartite board or advisory committee that there were no audits, findings, and then it's kind of a pat yourself on the back moment. And then standard 9.3, the department has presented to the tripartite board / advisory body for review or action within the last 12 months, a review of the outcomes and operational or strategic program adjustments and improvements identified as necessary. So again, this is one of the ones that it can just be really easy to forget to present this to the board, right? We may be compiling all the data and we have our review and our strategy and our things that we do, but the aspect of presenting it to the board and documenting that is what will sometimes trip people up. So hopefully you've heard me and us say tripartite board / advisory committee enough times today, because I have said enough times for, well, regional forums start tomorrow. So I guess I'm going to be saying it again quite a bit. And that is kind of it for today, folks. I know that's a lot of information. And hopefully as the years go by, we have been able to sort of streamline this process a little bit and to really, beef up our documentation around it, because once again, we know it's a very complex, very involved process that takes a lot of people power and hours. So please do check out our resources. Of course, we have the CSBG grantee resources page, which has been revamped for accessibility, which means it's a little bit more difficult to navigate in some ways now. So if you have any questions or have any difficulty finding things, let us know. And of course, the Colorado Community Action Association has myriad wonderful resources as well, both on the website as well as their human resources, which I am deeply grateful for every day. So I don't see any questions in the chat. Would anybody like to come off mute to ask any questions you may have, or maybe tell a joke? One of these days, someone's going to have an awesome dad joke for me. I'm just waiting for it.
I have a quick question.
Sure, Heather.
Because our county strategic plan didn't match the org standards, we developed a simple plan. Instead of answering the questions on the application, can we just note that our strategic plan is attached and upload that with our application at the time?
What an interesting question. I think what I would encourage, in part, because of our wonderful state processes and procedures, if nothing else, just cut and paste any applicable text from your strategic plan into those little boxes that are in the application. And I think that there's a high likelihood that that should be sufficient. But of course, if you want to send it to me first, and I can certainly review, I'm happy to do that as well. But yeah, it sounds like you have a document that could kind of easily be cut and pasted in, and that's probably the best for us, checking our boxes on our end to make sure everything was received.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Hayden with Jefferson County. Hello.
Hi. So I do have a question on the grantee resources webpage.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find it.
Yeah. So it is different now. This link here should be updated. So when you click on it, it is no longer two separate pages the way it was before. It's kind of one page now. So click on that link in the presentation, and I will include an updated link when I email everybody. So this is kind of our initial stuff that was on that first overarching page, and then the resources are all down here in this handy dandy drop down.
Okie
And
dokie.
here's this highly accessible, difficult to read, no longer a table, but just a series of words for the poverty level chart. And then, our various links here. So we are aware that in some ways it's not as aesthetically pleasing, but we are happy that for folks who need some different accessibility measures, hopefully it's a little bit easier for them to use. So
Okay, well, thank you so much. Is there any way you could add the grantee resources right before resources?
oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's
because I thought that was just gonna be in general, but thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's exactly the kind of feedback that is really helpful for us. So anybody who's looking at our page or any of our other materials, as you have suggestions, let us know, because you know, we are a finely tuned machine over here getting these resources out. So let us know what works best for you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hayden. All righty. Anybody else with questions? Last call. Okay, Amber sent in the table seemed to be a more helpful format for Amber's perspective. Some subs pulled this table to use in income verification documentation. The table for income seemed to be more helpful. Yeah, for sure. And maybe if nothing else, even if we can't have the table listed on the website, maybe we'll just be sure to send it out periodically, like a more sort of visual table. And so of course, we'll still reference this website for folks who do have access needs, but maybe we can continue to provide that as a resource in a different way, so that folks who have found it useful can continue to use it. I appreciate that, Amber. And then a link to the federal website that has the table. I think that's a great idea. So link to the feds as well. Actually, we used to have that and it's no longer there. So I wonder if that's an accessibility thing, but if it's not, even if it's not on the website, then we'll be sure to send it out pretty regularly. And then Josiah, thank you for dropping the other good FPL table into the chat. And okay, Karen, it's definitely different. You're absolutely right, Karen. It definitely is. But at, you know, fines of $3,500 or something for inaccessible websites, it became a priority pretty quickly for us. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Please do keep the feedback coming. That's how we are able to develop awesome resources. Hopefully, I call them awesome. That's our word for it. And hopefully they are helpful for everybody, and we want to continue fine tuning them. So thank you everybody for being on the call today. Thank you, Colorado Community Action Agency folks. Your work is invaluable to the state and the nation in a lot of ways. Anybody who has questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. We are super eager to help everybody, and please continue the exceptional work that you do in the state of Colorado, making us look good. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.